At 9:47 a.m. on January 3, 1943, Staff Sergeant Alan Magee crouched inside the cramped ball turret beneath B-17F number 4124620, tracking German fighter positions through scratched plexiglass as his bomber formation approached the most heavily defended target in occupied France. 24 years old, 7 combat missions, 0 confirmed kills from his twin 50 caliber machine guns. The German flak batteries protecting Saint-Nazaire had already destroyed 4 American bombers that morning. Magee's squadron called the port city Flak City. The nickname was earned. German 88mm anti-aircraft guns ringed the massive U-boat pens where submarines received torpedoes before hunting Allied convoys across the Atlantic. The 303rd Bomb Group had launched 17 B-17 Flying Fortresses from Royal Air Force Molesworth in England 3 hours earlier. Their target was a torpedo storage facility adjacent to the submarine base. Intelligence estimated the facility held enough weapons to arm 60 U-boats. 85 American bombers filled the sky over Saint-Nazaire that morning, 72 B-17s, 13 B-24 Liberators. German fighters swarmed the formation before the bombers reached their initial point. Focke-Wulf 190s, Messerschmitt 109s. The escorts had turned back at the French coast. Fuel limitations. The bombers pressed forward alone. Magee fit perfectly into the ball turret. 5 feet 6 inches tall, 155 pounds. Most men couldn't squeeze into the 4-foot diameter sphere suspended beneath the bomber's belly. Magee strapped himself into a fetal position with his knees drawn up and his hands gripping control sticks that rotated the turret 360 degrees. The entire mechanism hung exposed to enemy fire, with nothing but thin plexiglass between Magee and the freezing air at 22,000 feet. Ball turret gunners had the highest casualty rate of any position on a B-17 crew. German fighters attacked from below. They knew. Target the turret first. Disable the bottom gun, then rake the bomber's underside with cannon fire. At 9:49 a.m., a German flak shell detonated 15 feet beneath Snap Crackle Pop. The B-17 shuddered. Metal fragments punched through the ball turret's glass dome and mechanical systems. The turret stopped rotating. Magee felt warm blood spreading across his chest. Shrapnel. At least 4 pieces, maybe more. He couldn't tell. The hydraulics were dead. The guns wouldn't traverse. He was trapped in a disabled turret beneath a bomber flying through the heaviest anti-aircraft fire in Western Europe. Magee manually cranked the turret until the entry hatch aligned with the fuselage opening. He pulled himself up through the narrow passage into the bomber. His flight suit was shredded. Blood soaked through the layers. He grabbed for his parachute pack stored near the radio room. The pack was destroyed. Flak had torn through the fuselage and shredded the silk canopy inside. Magee stared at useless fabric and tangled cords. No backup parachute. No second chance. The 303rd Bomb Group would lose 4 B-17s on this mission, 28 crew members. Major Charles Sheridan, the 427th Squadron commander, would die when his bomber went down 6 minutes after Magee's turret was hit. If you want to see how Magee survived what should have been impossible, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Magee. Magee looked forward through the fuselage. He needed to reach Technical Sergeant Alfred Union in the radio room. Union had a parachute. Maybe they could strap themselves together, share one chute. It was possible. Magee had heard of crews doing it. He started moving through the bomb bay catwalk. A second flak shell hit Snap Crackle Pop. The explosion tore a massive hole in the fuselage wall, 3 feet from where Magee stood. He felt the concussive blast, watched debris spiral into the slipstream. Then a German fighter appeared off the right wing. Focke-Wulf 190. Its nose lit up with cannon fire. 20mm rounds walked across the B-17's wing route. The right wing separated from the fuselage. Snap Crackle Pop entered a vicious spin. The centrifugal force slammed Magee against the fuselage wall. He tried to grab a structural beam. Couldn't hold it. The aircraft was rotating too fast, spinning like a wheel. At 22,000 feet, the air held almost no oxygen. Magee's vision tunneled. His lungs burned. He lost consciousness. The spinning bomber threw him through the massive hole in the fuselage. Staff Sergeant Alan Magee fell into empty sky without a parachute. 4 miles below, The glass-roofed Saint-Nazaire train station waited in the center of the city. Magee would reach terminal velocity in 12 seconds, 120 miles per hour. He had 2 minutes before impact. No parachute, no chance. And absolutely no idea he was falling toward the only structure in France that might possibly save his life. The human body becomes unconscious at altitudes above 18,000 feet without supplemental oxygen. Magee had no oxygen mask. He had been moving through the unpressurized fuselage when the bomber disintegrated. His body tumbled through thin air where each breath pulled in almost nothing. Hypoxia shut down his brain in seconds. He fell limp. Arms and legs splayed, spinning slowly as he dropped through 20,000 feet. Terminal velocity for a falling human body depends on position and clothing. Skydivers in streamlined positions reach 120 miles per hour. Magee wore a heavy leather flight jacket, fleece-lined pants, and thick boots. The gear created drag. His unconscious body assumed a belly-down position. Wind resistance slowed his acceleration. He would hit the ground at approximately 120 miles per hour, the same speed as a car crash on a highway. Except Magee was falling from 4.2 miles up. No one survives falls from 22,000 feet. The physics are absolute. Impact force equals mass times velocity squared. A 155-pound man hitting concrete at 120 miles per hour generates the same force as being struck by a freight train. Bones shatter. Organs rupture. The human body is not designed to absorb that much energy in a fraction of a second. But survival is not impossible. 3 months earlier, on September 19, 1942, Soviet Air Force Lieutenant Ivan Chesov fell 21,000 feet when his Ilyushin bomber was destroyed over Russia. He landed in a snow-covered ravine. The slope and deep snow dissipated the impact energy. Chesov survived with severe injuries. The Soviet government documented the incident, verified it. Chesov lived until 1986, 2 years after Magee's fall. On March 24, 1944, British Flight Sergeant Nicholas Alcomade would jump from his burning Lancaster bomber at 18,000 feet without a parachute. He preferred a quick death over burning alive. Alcomade crashed through pine trees and landed in deep snow. He survived with a sprained leg. The German soldiers who captured him didn't believe his story until they found the wreckage with his unused parachute burned inside. Survival required one critical element. Something to break the fall. Snow, trees, water, a sloped surface. Something to absorb impact energy over time instead of instantaneously. Without that element, falling from 4 miles guaranteed death. Saint-Nazaire had no snow, no forests, no sloped hillsides near the city center. The train station sat on level ground, surrounded by concrete streets and brick buildings. Its main hall featured a peaked glass roof supported by steel girders. French architects had designed it in 1867. The roof measured 60 feet across and rose 30 feet above the station floor. Hundreds of individual glass panels fit into an iron framework. Each panel was 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall. Quarter-inch thick glass. Fragile, decorative, completely unsuited for stopping a falling man. German soldiers occupied the station. They used it as a transportation hub for moving supplies to the U-boat pens 4 blocks away. Troops waited on the platforms. Officers checked manifests in the main hall beneath the glass ceiling. At 9:51 a.m., someone heard a strange sound, high-pitched, growing louder, like wind through a narrow gap. Several soldiers looked up. Magee regained consciousness during the fall. He opened his eyes at 6,000 feet. His mind struggled to process what was happening. Sky above, city below, wind roaring past his ears. He was falling. The realization hit him like the flak explosion that destroyed his bomber. He was falling, and he had no parachute, and he was going to die in the next 30 seconds. Magee couldn't scream. The wind tore the air from his lungs. He couldn't move his arms. The rushing air held them pinned. He could only watch the city grow larger, see individual buildings, streets, the harbor, a train station with a distinctive glass roof directly beneath his falling body. He had 15 seconds left. Magee tried to pray. The words wouldn't come. His mind was too focused on the approaching ground, the rooftops, the glass ceiling of the station rushing up at 120 miles per hour. In 10 seconds, he would hit that roof. The glass would shatter. He would crash through into the station. German soldiers would find his body on the floor. 5 seconds. 3. At 9:52 a.m. on January 3, 1943, Staff Sergeant Alan Magee struck the glass roof of the Saint-Nazaire train station at 120 miles per hour. The impact sounded like a bomb going off inside the building. The glass roof exploded into thousands of fragments. Magee's body punched through the first layer of panels. The iron framework between panels caught him for a split second. His momentum tore him through. He hit a second layer of glass. The panels shattered, created more drag, slowed his fall by perhaps 20 miles per hour. He crashed through a third section. The cumulative effect of breaking through multiple glass barriers distributed the impact energy over nearly 2 seconds instead of the instantaneous collision that would have killed him on concrete. The physics are measurable. Each glass panel absorbed kinetic energy. The iron framework deflected his trajectory slightly. His body tumbled as it fell through the roof structure. The rotation changed his impact angle. Instead of hitting the station floor straight down, he struck at a shallow angle and skidded across the tiles. The combination of factors reduced the effective impact force by approximately 60%. Magee landed on the floor of the main hall 30 feet below the shattered roof. He was still alive, barely, unconscious, bleeding from dozens of wounds, but his heart was beating. German soldiers rushed toward the center of the hall. Glass shards covered everything. Sunlight poured through the massive hole in the roof. The soldiers expected to find a body, a corpse. No one could survive that impact. They reached the crumpled figure and stopped. The American airman was breathing. Magee had 28 separate shrapnel wounds from the flak hit that destroyed his ball turret. The entry wounds ranged from small punctures to gaping tears in his chest and legs. He had sustained those injuries before falling. Now he had additional trauma from the 4-mile drop and the crash through the glass roof. His right leg was broken in 3 places. His ankle was shattered. Multiple ribs were fractured. His nose was crushed. Severe damage to his right eye. Both lungs had been punctured, one by shrapnel, the other by broken ribs during impact. His kidneys showed signs of internal bleeding. His right arm was nearly severed. Glass from the roof had sliced through muscle, tendons, and arteries. The arm hung attached by a thin strip of tissue. Blood pooled beneath his body. The German soldiers could see bone. A German doctor arrived within minutes. The station had a first aid post for treating wounded soldiers being evacuated from the front. The doctor knelt beside Magee and assessed the injuries. The blood loss alone should have killed him. The internal damage was catastrophic. The severed arm would require amputation. There was no way to save it. The doctor began preparing instruments. But something made him stop. The doctor was a military surgeon. He had treated hundreds of wounded men, seen soldiers die from injuries far less severe than Magee's wounds. This American should be dead. The fall should have killed him. The blood loss should have killed him. The shock should have killed him. Yet somehow the airman's heart kept beating. His lungs kept pulling in shallow breaths. Against every medical probability, the American was alive. The doctor made a decision that would save Magee's arm and possibly his life. Instead of amputation, he would attempt surgical repair, reconnect the severed arteries, suture the torn muscles, splint the bones. It would take hours. The American might die on the table, but the doctor later told Magee he believed that any man who could survive a 22,000-foot fall deserved every possible chance to keep his arm. German soldiers moved Magee to the Hermitage Hotel, which the Wehrmacht had converted into a military hospital. The surgery lasted 4 hours. The doctor reconnected arteries smaller than pencil lead, stitched together muscles fiber by fiber, set broken bones throughout Magee's body, drained fluid from his punctured lungs, treated the shrapnel wounds, cleaned and sutured the lacerations from the glass. Magee regained consciousness 12 hours later. He opened his eyes and saw a German officer standing beside the bed. The officer informed him in accented English that he was a prisoner of war, that his aircraft had been destroyed, that he had fallen from the sky into the train station. Magee didn't understand, couldn't process the information. The last thing he remembered was the spinning bomber, the hole in the fuselage, falling into darkness. He had no memory of the fall, no memory of hitting the glass roof, no memory of crashing through into the station. His mind had shut down to protect itself. The entire descent from 22,000 feet existed as a blank space. He knew intellectually that it must have happened. The German officer said it happened. His shattered body proved it happened. But Magee possessed no conscious memory of the most impossible moment of his life. The doctor visited the next morning, told Magee through a translator that his arm would heal, that he would survive, that the surgery had been successful. Then the doctor said something Magee would remember for the rest of his life. "We are enemies, but I am first a doctor, and I will do my best to save you." Magee spent the next 10 weeks recovering in the Hermitage Hotel under German medical care. The Hermitage Hotel overlooked the harbor where German U-boats waited for torpedoes from the storage facility that Magee's squadron had failed to destroy. The mission achieved minimal damage to the target. Bombing accuracy from high altitude remained inconsistent in early 1943. The 303rd Bomb Group dropped their ordnance, but most bombs missed the torpedo shed. The facility remained operational. U-boats continued receiving weapons. The Atlantic convoy losses continued. The mission cost was severe. 4 B-17s from the 303rd Bomb Group were shot down. 28 aircrew were killed or missing. Another 47 bombers returned to England with damage from flak and fighter attacks. 7 crew members from other squadrons died. 75 American airmen were killed or captured on January 3, 1943, over Saint-Nazaire. The raid would be studied later as an example of the high cost of unescorted daylight bombing. Snap Crackle Pop crashed in the La Baule-Escoublac forest 6 miles west of Saint-Nazaire. The impact scattered wreckage across a quarter mile. German soldiers reached the crash site within an hour. They found 7 bodies. The pilot, Lieutenant Arthur Adams, the co-pilot, Lieutenant Gene Wintersetter, the bombardier, Lieutenant Michael Libonati, the flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Lewis Hart, the radio operator, Technical Sergeant Alfred Union, the waist gunner, Staff Sergeant Edward Durant, the other waist gunner, Sergeant Marvin Milam. 3 crew members survived: Staff Sergeant Alan Magee, who fell without a parachute, Lieutenant Glenn Harrington, the navigator, who parachuted into the ocean near the coast, Sergeant James Gordon, the tail gunner, who also parachuted into the water. German patrol boats recovered both men. Harrington had severe injuries to his leg. German surgeons amputated below the knee. He would spend the remainder of the war in prisoner of war camps. Gordon suffered minor injuries and was sent directly to Stalag Luft camp system. The Germans salvaged the nose art panel from Snap Crackle Pop. The distinctive painting showed the 3 Rice Krispies mascots riding a 500-pound bomb. Snap wore a chef's hat. Crackle held a wrench. Pop carried a mallet. Captain Jacob Fredericks had commissioned the artwork when he first received the bomber in September 1942. Fredericks worked for Kellogg Corporation before the war. The nose art became a trophy displayed in a German officer's villa overlooking the Atlantic. French resistance members documented the crash site. They photographed the wreckage, recorded the tail number 4124620, noted the location coordinates, buried what remains they could recover. The information was passed to Allied intelligence through underground networks. The 7 crew members were officially listed as killed in action. Their families received telegrams in late January. The War Department provided few details. Aircraft lost over France. Crew did not survive. Magee's family received a different telegram. Missing in action. Status unknown. His mother wouldn't learn he was alive until March, when the Red Cross confirmed he was a prisoner in German custody. Even then, she didn't know about the fall. The German military didn't report the circumstances of his capture. The Red Cross documentation listed him as wounded ball turret gunner, sustained injuries in combat, being treated at military hospital in occupied France. The German doctor, whose name Magee never learned, treated him for 10 weeks, changed bandages daily, monitored the arm for signs of infection, adjusted splints as bones began to heal. The shrapnel wounds closed slowly. The punctured lungs recovered. The broken ribs mended. The damaged kidney regained function. Against all probability, the severed arm healed. Circulation returned. Nerve function partially restored. Magee could move his fingers, make a fist. The grip strength would never fully return, but the arm was functional. In mid-March 1943, German authorities determined Magee was stable enough for transport. He was transferred from the Hermitage Hotel to a prisoner processing center, then to Stalag Luft 17B, a camp for captured airmen located in Krems, Austria. The journey took 4 days by train. Magee traveled with other wounded prisoners, some with amputations, others with burns, men who had bailed out of crippled bombers over Germany and France and survived. The camp held approximately 4,000 Allied airmen, British, American, Canadian, Australian, men shot down over occupied Europe, living in crowded barracks, eating minimal rations, waiting for the war to end. The Germans separated officers from enlisted men. Magee joined the non-commissioned officer compound. He was assigned to a barracks with 60 other sergeants. Most were gunners like him. Some had flown 20 missions before being shot down. Others had been captured on their first. None had fallen 22,000 feet without a parachute and lived. When Magee told his story, some prisoners didn't believe him. The physics seemed impossible. One sergeant calculated the terminal velocity and impact force. The math said Magee should be dead. But Magee showed them his scars, the reconstructed arm, the impact injuries that matched a high-velocity collision. Eventually, most accepted that something impossible had occurred over Saint-Nazaire. Magee would remain in Stalag Luft 17B for 26 months, from March 1943 until May 1945. 792 days of waiting. Life in Stalag Luft 17B followed strict routines. Morning roll call at 6 a.m. Prisoners stood in formation while German guards counted. The process took an hour, regardless of weather. Rain, snow, freezing temperatures, the count had to match records exactly. Any discrepancy triggered searches and interrogations. Escape attempts were rare, but the Germans maintained vigilance. Rations were minimal. Each prisoner received approximately 1,500 calories per day. Breakfast was ersatz coffee, made from roasted grain and a slice of black bread. Lunch consisted of watery soup with occasional potato chunks. Dinner brought another piece of bread and sometimes a small portion of cheese or sausage. Red Cross parcels supplemented the German rations when they arrived. The parcels contained canned meat, chocolate, cigarettes, and coffee. Real coffee. The prisoners treated these supplies like currency, trading cigarettes for extra food, bartering chocolate for clothing repairs. Magee's arm continued healing through 1943. The mobility improved slowly. He could grip objects, lift light items, write letters home through the Red Cross mail system. The letters took months to reach New Jersey. His mother wrote back describing life at home, war production, rationing, his siblings serving in other branches. The letters provided connection to a world that felt increasingly distant. The physical recovery progressed better than expected. Magee regained strength in his legs. The broken bones healed properly despite minimal medical care in the camp. His lung capacity returned to near normal. The shrapnel wounds left permanent scars but caused no long-term complications. The damaged kidney compensated. His body adapted. By winter 1943, Magee could perform basic exercise, push-ups, sit-ups, walking laps around the compound perimeter. Other prisoners organized activities to maintain morale and sanity. Educational classes taught by men with university backgrounds, language instruction, mathematics, history, engineering. Some prisoners built makeshift theaters and performed plays. Others formed musical groups using instruments crafted from scrap materials. The Germans allowed these activities as long as they didn't interfere with camp operations or constitute security risks. News from the outside world arrived through multiple channels. Guards sometimes shared information. New prisoners brought updates from recent combat operations. Hidden radios picked up BBC broadcasts. The prisoners learned about major campaigns: North Africa, Sicily, Italy. The strategic bombing offensive intensified through 1944. More bombers filled the skies over Germany. More crews were shot down. More men arrived at the camps. By late 1944, the prisoner population at Stalag Luft 17B had grown to nearly 5,000. New barracks were constructed. Existing buildings became overcrowded. 2 men shared bunks designed for one. Disease spread easily in close quarters. Dysentery, influenza, tuberculosis. The camp hospital had limited supplies and few trained medical personnel. Some men died from treatable conditions because proper medicine wasn't available. Winter 1944 brought severe cold. The barracks had minimal heating. Prisoners wore every piece of clothing they owned, slept under thin blankets. Some burned wooden bed slats for warmth until the guards confiscated them. Frostbite became common. Men lost toes, fingers. The cold compounded the effects of malnutrition. Bodies couldn't generate enough heat. Weight dropped. Immune systems weakened. The German guards became increasingly tense through early 1945. News filtered through that Soviet forces were advancing from the east. American and British armies pushed from the west. Germany was being crushed between two massive fronts. The guards knew the war was lost. Some remained professional. Others grew hostile. A few quietly suggested they hoped the Americans would arrive before the Soviets. On April 29, 1945, prisoners heard artillery fire in the distance. The sound grew louder over the next week. German officers began destroying records, burning files. The guards prepared to evacuate. Some prisoners expected forced marches deeper into Germany, death marches. Other camps had experienced them. Thousands of prisoners walked hundreds of miles. Many died from exhaustion or were shot when they couldn't continue. But the march order never came. On May 8, 1945, the guards abandoned Stalag Luft 17B. They left during the night. Prisoners woke to find the towers unmanned, the gates unlocked. German soldiers had simply walked away. Within hours, American tanks rolled through the camp entrance. The 326th Infantry Division. Soldiers jumped from vehicles and told the prisoners the war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The prisoners were free. Staff Sergeant Alan Magee had survived 792 days in German captivity. He was going home. The liberation process moved quickly. American military personnel documented each prisoner: names, ranks, service numbers, units, date of capture, medical condition. Magee was processed on May 9th. The examining physician noted the extensive scarring, the reconstructed right arm, the healed fractures. When Magee explained the injuries came from a 22,000-foot fall without a parachute, the doctor wrote detailed notes, requested verification. The story seemed impossible, but the physical evidence supported it. Transport aircraft began evacuating prisoners on May 10th. C-47 Dakotas landed at a nearby airfield and loaded men for flights to processing centers in France. Magee flew out on May 12th, his first time in an aircraft since January 3, 1943. The flight took 90 minutes. He stared out the window at the landscape below, watched the ground pass safely beneath the plane, felt the engine's steady rhythm. The Dakota landed smoothly at an American airbase near Paris. Former prisoners spent several weeks at the processing center. Medical examinations, debriefings. Intelligence officers asked detailed questions about camp conditions, guard behavior, German military movements observed, escape attempts, treatment of wounded. Magee described the German doctor who saved his arm, provided what details he could remember about the Hermitage Hotel, the surgery, the care he received. American intelligence noted everything. Physical examinations revealed the extent of malnutrition. Most prisoners had lost between 30 and 50 pounds during captivity. Magee weighed 118 pounds when liberated, down 37 pounds from his pre-capture weight. Medical staff implemented careful refeeding protocols. Too much food too quickly could cause fatal complications in severely malnourished patients. The meals increased gradually. Small portions every few hours, bland foods initially, building up to normal rations over 2 weeks. Magee boarded a troop ship in late May. The vessel carried 5,000 former prisoners across the Atlantic. The voyage took 8 days. Men spent hours on deck watching the ocean, talking, processing what they'd survived. Some discussed their experiences openly. Others remained silent. The psychological impact of captivity varied. Some men seemed unchanged. Others showed signs of trauma that would last decades. The ship docked in New York Harbor on June 45. Magee saw the Statue of Liberty from the deck. Crowds filled the pier. Families waiting for sons and husbands. Military bands played. Reporters photographed the returning prisoners. Magee walked down the gangplank carrying a small bag of possessions. His mother and 2 sisters waited at the barrier. The reunion lasted several minutes. No one spoke. They simply held each other. The Army granted Magee 30 days leave. He spent the time in Plainfield, New Jersey, recovering strength and adjusting to civilian life. Slept in a real bed, ate home-cooked meals, gained back 15 pounds in 3 weeks. His mother noticed he never discussed the fall or the crash. He answered questions about camp life, described the liberation, talked about other prisoners, but the 4-mile descent through empty sky remained off limits. The subject was closed. In July, Magee reported to an Army medical board for evaluation. Doctors assessed his fitness for continued military service. The right arm showed limited range of motion. Grip strength measured 40% below normal. The injury was permanent. The board determined he was unfit for combat duty, but could potentially serve in non-combat roles. Magee declined. He requested discharge. The paperwork was processed quickly. Staff Sergeant Alan Magee received his honorable discharge on August 1, 1945. The Army awarded him the Air Medal for meritorious achievement during combat operations. The citation mentions 7 bombing missions over occupied Europe, aggressive defense of his aircraft against enemy fighters, devotion to duty under extreme circumstances. He also received the Purple Heart for injuries sustained in combat. The Prisoner of War Medal would be established decades later. Magee received it retroactively in the 1980s. Most men who survived what Magee survived would avoid aircraft forever. The trauma of falling from 22,000 feet would create permanent fear of flying. But Magee made an unusual decision in 1946. He enrolled in flight school, learned to fly single-engine aircraft, studied navigation, meteorology, aircraft systems. He earned his private pilot's license in October 1946, then pursued additional ratings, multi-engine, instrument, commercial certificate. Aviation became his career. He worked for various airlines in maintenance and operations roles, started with small regional carriers, moved to larger companies. His experience as a ball turret gunner and his understanding of B-17 systems made him valuable in aircraft maintenance departments. He understood how bombers functioned under stress, knew which systems failed first, could identify potential problems before they became critical. Magee married Helen in 1948. They built a quiet life, rarely discussed the war. Friends knew he had served. Most didn't know about the fall. The story remained private, something that belonged to him alone. The silence lasted 38 years. Magee worked in aviation, flew aircraft, maintained bombers, trained mechanics, built a career in an industry where precision and safety were paramount. He understood risk, calculated probabilities, knew the statistics on high-altitude falls. The numbers said he should be dead. The physics said survival was impossible. Yet he had lived. The contradiction existed as an unresolved equation in his mind, something that defied explanation, so he didn't try to explain it. In 1979, Magee retired from the airline industry. He and Helen moved to northern New Mexico, a small town with clear skies and minimal air traffic. The quiet suited them. But retirement brought time. Hours that had previously been filled with work now stretched empty. Memories that had been suppressed by busy schedules began surfacing. The war, the missions, the men who died, the impossible fall. In 1981, Smithsonian Magazine contacted Magee. A researcher had discovered his story while investigating survival accounts from World War II. The magazine wanted to feature him in an article about the 10 most amazing survival stories of the war. Magee initially declined. The story was private, personal, not something for public consumption. But the researcher persisted, explained that the article would honor all survivors, document their experiences for historical record, preserve the accounts before the generation was gone. Magee agreed to an interview. The article appeared in the September 1981 issue, detailed account of the January 3, 1943 mission, the flak damage, the destroyed parachute, the fall, the glass roof, the German doctor, the recovery. Other survival stories filled the feature: Nicholas Alcamade's tree landing, Ivan Chisov's snow ravine, sailors who survived torpedo strikes, soldiers who walked out of jungles. The article positioned these accounts as documented facts, verified incidents, real events that defied normal survival parameters. The publication changed things. People who knew Magee learned about the fall. Friends asked questions. Aviation colleagues wanted details. Local newspapers in New Mexico requested interviews. Magee gave a few, kept the responses factual, avoided dramatic embellishment, stuck to what he remembered and what German records confirmed. He had fallen. He had survived. The mechanism involved a glass roof and improbable physics. Beyond that, speculation seemed pointless. In 1993, a letter arrived from France. Michel Luguez, president of an American Memorial Association in Saint-Nazaire, had read the Smithsonian article. French citizens wanted to honor the crew of Snap Crackle Pop. They had located the crash site in La Baule-Escoublac forest, found fragments of the aircraft, identified the 7 crew members killed. They planned to erect a memorial. Would Magee attend the dedication ceremony? Magee was 74 years old. 50 years had passed since the mission. He had never returned to France, never visited the crash site, never seen the train station where he landed. Helen encouraged him to go, close the circle, see the place where the impossible had occurred. Magee agreed. On September 23, 1995, Alan and Helen Magee arrived in Saint-Nazaire. Michel Luguez met them at Nantes Atlantique Airport, served as their escort throughout the visit. The city had been 90% destroyed during the war. Allied bombing, German demolitions during the retreat. Post-war reconstruction had transformed the landscape. Modern buildings replaced ruins. New streets followed different patterns. The harbor remained. The submarine pen stood intact, too heavily reinforced for bombs to destroy, now used for other purposes. The memorial ceremony took place on September 23rd. French citizens gathered in La Baule-Escoublac forest at the crash site. A 6-foot granite monument bore the names of the 7 crew members killed when Snap Crackle Pop went down. Lieutenant Arthur Adams, Lieutenant Jean Wintersetter, Lieutenant Michael Libonati, Technical Sergeant Louis Hart, Technical Sergeant Alfred Union, Staff Sergeant Edward Durant, Sergeant Marvin Milam. Magee stood before the memorial while a priest conducted a service. French officials spoke about sacrifice, liberation, the cost of freedom. The mayor of Saint-Nazaire presented Magee with a certificate naming him Citizen of Honor, thanked him for his service, acknowledged his crew's sacrifice. Many local residents attended. Some were children during the war. They remembered the bombing raids, the American aircraft overhead, the fear and hope mixed together. After the ceremony, Luguez drove the Magees to the train station. The building had been repaired, the glass roof replaced. New panels fit into the restored iron framework. Magee stood in the main hall looking up at the ceiling, tried to imagine falling through it at 120 miles per hour. Couldn't. The memory remained absent. His mind possessed no record of that moment. He knew it happened. The evidence proved it, but the experience itself was gone, locked away or erased, protected by whatever mechanism the brain uses to shield itself from unbearable trauma. Someone had recovered the nose art panel from Snap Crackle Pop, the distinctive painting of the Rice Krispies mascots. German officers had kept it as a trophy until 1945. After the surrender, a French civilian found it discarded, preserved it for decades, had it restored in 1989. The panel was displayed at the memorial site, Snap riding the bomb, Crackle with his wrench, Pop holding the mallet. Magee touched the painted metal, last physical connection to the aircraft that carried him on 7 missions and then disintegrated at 22,000 feet. The following day, Magee and Helen visited the American Military Cemetery at St. James in Normandy. Row after row of white crosses, thousands of graves. Magee found the markers for his crew members, stood silently at each one. No words, just presence, acknowledgement. They had died. He had lived. The randomness of it defied logic. 52 years later, the questions remained unanswered. Magee returned to New Mexico, carrying something he hadn't possessed before. Not closure exactly, but recognition. The French had remembered. They honored the dead. They acknowledged the survivor. The story was no longer just his. It belonged to history now. 8 years later, Alan Eugene Magee died. December 20th, 2003, San Angelo, Texas. Alan Eugene Magee died in a local hospital from complications of a stroke and kidney failure. He was 84 years old. 60 years and 352 days had passed since he fell from 22,000 feet without a parachute and survived. His body was cremated. The remains were buried at Pioneer Memorial Park in Grape Creek, Texas. A simple marker. No mention of the fall, no dramatic inscription, just his name, dates, and veteran status. Helen survived him. His sister in Houston survived him. The obituary in the San Angelo Standard-Times was brief, 3 paragraphs. Former ball turret gunner, worked in aviation industry, retired to New Mexico. The newspaper didn't mention the fall, the impossible survival, the glass roof. Most readers had no idea they were reading about one of the most statistically improbable events in military history. But the story didn't die with Magee. Researchers continued studying the incident. Aviation safety experts analyzed the physics. Medical professionals examined the survival factors. The fall remained the gold standard for understanding how human bodies can survive extreme impacts under specific conditions. Every element had to align perfectly. The unconscious body position created maximum drag. The heavy flight gear slowed acceleration. The glass roof broke in stages instead of shattering completely. The iron framework distributed impact forces. The tumbling rotation changed the landing angle. The station floor was smooth tile instead of rough concrete. Remove any single factor, and Magee dies. Conscious body assumes streamlined position. Acceleration increases. Impact velocity rises. No glass roof, direct collision with ground, instant death. Hit the roof at a perpendicular angle instead of tumbling. All force concentrated in one moment. Fatal. The survival required a combination of physics, architecture, and probability so unlikely that it has never been duplicated under similar circumstances. 3 other documented cases exist of people surviving falls above 20,000 feet. Ivan Chisov, Nicholas Alcamade, Julianne Kopka, who survived a 30,000-foot fall when her aircraft broke apart over the Peruvian Amazon in 1971. She was 17 years old, landed in dense jungle. The canopy and vegetation absorbed impact energy. She walked out after 11 days. Each case involved different survival mechanisms: snow, trees, jungle canopy, glass roof, nature or human construction providing the critical deceleration that made survival possible. Vesna Vulovic holds the world record, a Serbian flight attendant who survived when her McDonnell Douglas DC-9 exploded at 33,000 feet in 1972. She landed in snow-covered mountains. The aircraft debris created a cone that protected her during impact. She survived with severe injuries, but recovered. The Guinness Book of World Records certified her fall as the highest survived without a parachute. But Magee's fall remains unique for one reason. He crashed through a man-made structure in an urban environment and survived. No natural element softened the impact. Just architectural design from 1867 and physics that happened to work in his favor for 2 seconds. The glass roof of Saint-Nazaire train station was never intended to save lives. It was decorative, aesthetic. Yet it became the single factor that allowed Staff Sergeant Alan Magee to walk away from an impossible situation. The memorial in La Baule-Escoublac Forest still stands. French citizens maintain it. Place flowers on anniversaries. Remember the 7 men who died when Snap Crackle Pop went down. The nose art panel resides in a museum, preserved as an artifact from a bomber that flew 7 missions before being destroyed by German flak and fighters over occupied France. The train station in Saint-Nazaire operates normally. Passengers wait on platforms, trains arrive and depart. The glass roof was completely replaced during post-war reconstruction. Modern panels, stronger framework, different design. But the location remains. The same spot where an American ball turret gunner crashed through at 120 miles per hour on January 3, 1943, and somehow lived. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about gunners and pilots and soldiers who faced impossible odds with courage. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Alan Magee and his crew don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.